Jonathan, a sheriff who upholds justice and strives to break down racial biases, felt his world spinning when he received the news that his son Jamal had been unjustly arrested by the officers. This unexpected incident threw him into a dilemma. On one hand was his own son, and on the other was the problem within the police force that urgently needed rectification. But what happened next would bring an unprecedented change to the entire town. Hey everyone, welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's get started. In a small southern town, where the sense of community runs deep and everyone seemingly knows everyone else's business, 17-year-old Jamal Thompson was living his life with a single-minded focus. Basketball was not just a pastime for him, it was his ticket to a better future. The high school gymnasium was his second home, and on this particular evening, he was putting in extra hours of practice, completely immersed in his dream of earning a college scholarship. The polished floor of the gym echoed with the rhythmic bouncing of the basketball as Jamal repeatedly sank perfect three-pointers. The sound reverberated through the empty space, a testament to his dedication and the late hour. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, he glanced up at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 p.m. He had lost track of time once again, but with college scouts set to attend the next game, every extra minute of practice was invaluable. Gathering his belongings, Jamal made his way towards the exit. His mind was already racing with thoughts of scholarships and the life that awaited him beyond the confines of their small town. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside, providing a welcome relief after hours spent in the stuffy gym. The streets were quiet, most of the town's residents already tucked away in their beds. Streetlights cast long shadows as Jamal began his walk home, his basketball securely tucked under one arm. However, as Jamal turned onto Maple Street, the silence of the night was abruptly shattered by the blare of a police siren. Red and blue lights flooded the darkness, and his heart skipped a beat. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but years of cautionary tales from his parents about the treatment of young black men by the police echoed in his mind. Two officers emerged from the patrol car, their faces stern and unyielding. "Hold it right there, son," the taller of the two, Officer Miller, called out, his hand resting ominously on his holster. "What are you doing out so late?" Jamal's throat went dry, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "I was just heading home, sir. I had late basketball practice." The officers exchanged a skeptical glance. "ID," the shorter one, Officer Reed, demanded, holding out his hand expectantly. As Jamal reached for his wallet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a routine stop. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and there was something in the officer's eyes that made his stomach churn with unease. Little did he know, this encounter would set in motion a series of events that would rock their small town to its core. "Basketball practice, huh?" Officer Miller sneered. "Funny, I didn't know breaking into cars was part of basketball training." Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. "Breaking into what?" "No, sir, I swear I was just at the school gym. You can call Coach Johnson if you don't believe me." Officer Reed circled around Jamal, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. A young man matching your description was seen trying car doors." Jamal's heart raced. He knew he was innocent, but the accusation alone was terrifying. "Officers, please, there must be some mistake. I've never." "Hands on the car." Officer Miller suddenly barked, cutting off Jamal's protests. Confused and frightened, Jamal complied, placing his palms flat on the hood of the patrol car. The cold metal beneath his hands seemed to mirror the icy fear spreading through his chest. As Officer Reed began to pat him down roughly, Jamal caught sight of movement from the corner of his eye. A small crowd was starting to gather. Neighbors, some of whom he had known his whole life, were peering out of windows and stepping onto porches to watch the scene unfold. The shame of being publicly humiliated burned hot on Jamal's cheeks. These were the people he grew up with: teachers, friends, parents, and the old lady who always gave out the best Halloween candy. And now, they were witnessing him being treated like a common criminal. "Officer, please," Jamal tried again, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm just trying to get home." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Officer Miller grabbed Jamal's arms, wrenching them behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed in the quiet street, a sound that would haunt Jamal's dreams for months to come. Miller began reciting the Miranda rights mechanically, but Jamal could barely hear him over the rushing in his ears. This couldn't be happening, not to him, not here. As the officers prepared to force him into the back of the patrol car, Jamal made a desperate decision. "Wait," he cried out. "Please, I need to call my father. He needs to know what's happening." Officer Reed scoffed. Yeah, right. So you can get your story straight? I don't think so, kid. But something in Jamal's pleading eyes must have sparked a flicker of doubt in Officer Miller. He hesitated, then nodded curtly. Fine. One call. Make it quick. With shaking hands, Jamal dialed the number he knew by heart. As the phone rang, he silently prayed his father would answer. On the third ring, a familiar voice came through the line. Jamal, what's wrong, son? The sound of his father's voice nearly broke Jamal's composure. Dad, he choked out, I need help. The police, they think I've done something wrong. They're arresting me, but I swear I didn't do anything. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Jamal heard his father's voice, low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel that he had never heard before. Where are you? Maple Street, Jamal replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I'm scared. Listen to me, Jamal, his father said firmly. Stay calm. Do exactly as they say and don't argue. I'm on my way. Everything's going to be all right, son. I promise. As Officer Miller snatched the phone away, ending the call, Jamal felt a small spark of hope ignite in his chest. His father was coming. Somehow, someway, he would make this right. What Jamal didn't know, what no one knew, was that this phone call would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. Across town, Jonathan Thompson, the newly appointed chief of the sheriff's office, was sitting in his dimly lit office, burdened with the weight of his responsibilities. He had been working late, poring over budget reports and staffing schedules. However, the moment he heard the fear in his son's voice on the phone, all thoughts of administrative duties vanished. Jonathan's mind raced as he grabbed his jacket and car keys. He had spent years building a reputation as a fair and just law enforcement officer, gradually climbing the ranks despite the challenges he faced as a black man in a predominantly white department. Now, in a cruel twist of fate, it was his own son who had fallen victim to the very prejudices he had fought so hard against. As he sped towards the sheriff's office, Jonathan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He had always known that a day like this might come, a day when his son would face the harsh realities of being a young black man in America. But he had hoped, even prayed, that things would be different in their small town, that the progress he had made and the bridges he had built would shield Jamal from such injustice. Now those hopes were shattered, replaced by a fierce determination to right this wrong and protect his son at all costs. When Jonathan arrived at the sheriff's office, the night shift was quiet. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the nearly empty bullpen. A few officers looked up in surprise as Jonathan entered, their faces registering shock at the sight of their chief arriving so late. But Jonathan barely noticed them. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of his son. Where is he? Jonathan demanded, his voice carrying an authority that made every head turn. Officer Jenkins, a veteran of the force, approached cautiously. Chief Thompson, we weren't expecting you tonight. Is everything all right? Jonathan fixed him with a steely gaze. My son was brought in tonight. Jamal Thompson. Where is he? Recognition dawned on Jenkins' face, quickly followed by confusion and then alarm. Your son? But Chief, I don't understand. Officers Miller and Reed brought in a suspect for attempted car theft about 20 minutes ago. They didn't say anything about where. Jonathan repeated, his patience wearing thin. Interrogation room 2, Jenkins replied, gesturing down the hallway. Without another word, Jonathan strode purposefully towards the interrogation rooms, leaving a trail of bewildered officers in his wake. As he approached room 2, he could hear muffled voices from within. His hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a moment as he composed himself. Then, with a swift motion, he pushed the door open. The scene that greeted him made his blood boil. Jamal sat hunched in a metal chair, his wrists still bound by handcuffs. His usually confident posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump that broke Jonathan's heart. Officers Miller and Reed stood on either side of the table, their faces a mix of smug satisfaction and barely concealed disdain. All three heads snapped up as Jonathan entered the room. Recognition dawned on the officers' faces, quickly followed by confusion and then, as understanding set in, undeniable fear. Chief Thompson, Officer Miller stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating in an instant. We didn't expect. We were just, Dad. Jamal's voice cracked with relief, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Jonathan's gaze softened as he looked at his son. But when he turned back to the officers, his eyes were hard as flint. Uncuff him now. Officer Reed fumbled with the keys, his hand shaking as he removed the handcuffs from Jamal's wrists. As soon as he was free, Jamal rushed into his father's arms, all pretense of toughness forgotten in the face of this ordeal. "It's okay, son," Jonathan murmured, holding Jamal tight for a moment before gently guiding him towards the door. "Wait for me outside. I need to have a word with these officers." As the door closed behind Jamal, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jonathan turned to face Miller and Reed, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourselves," he said, his voice deceptively calm. The officers exchanged nervous glances, neither wanting to be the first to speak. Finally, Miller cleared his throat. "Sir, we received reports of suspicious activity in the area. We observed your son walking alone late at night and decided to investigate." "And at what point," Jonathan asked, his voice dangerously low, "did investigating turn into handcuffing and arresting a teenager who was simply walking home from basketball practice?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. "He matched the description of..." "The description of what?" Jonathan interrupted, his carefully controlled anger finally breaking through. "A young black man walking down the street? Is that enough to warrant this kind of treatment in our town?" The officers fell silent, the weight of their actions finally sinking in. Jonathan looked at each of them in turn, his disappointment palpable. "I've spent years trying to build trust between our department and the community we serve. Years of working to overcome stereotypes and prove that we're here to protect and serve everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. And in one night, you've managed to undo so much of that progress." Miller opened his mouth to protest, but Jonathan held up a hand, silencing him. "I don't want to hear excuses. What I want is for you to understand the gravity of what you've done. That young man out there, he's not just my son. He's a student, a star athlete with dreams of college, a volunteer at the community center. And tonight, you made him feel like a criminal in his own neighborhood." The shame on the officers' faces was evident, but Jonathan wasn't finished. "But it's not just about Jamal. It's about every young person in this town who looks like him. Every time one of our officers acts on prejudice instead of probable cause, we lose a little more of the community's trust. And without that trust, we can't do our jobs effectively." Jonathan paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was thick with tension and regret. Finally, he spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Officers Miller and Reed, you are both suspended without pay effective immediately, pending a full investigation. You will be required to attend additional training on racial sensitivity and proper procedure. And depending on the outcome of that investigation, your future with this department will be re-evaluated." The officers nodded mutely, knowing better than to argue. As they filed out of the room, shoulders slumped in defeat, Jonathan called after them. "Remember this feeling. Remember the look in that boy's eyes when you put those cuffs on him. And the next time you're tempted to act on a hunch instead of evidence, think about whether it's worth destroying someone's trust in the very people who are supposed to protect them." As the door closed behind the officers, Jonathan allowed himself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbed away. He knew the coming days and weeks would be challenging. There would be questions, investigations, and likely some push back from those who didn't understand the importance of what had transpired here tonight. But as he stepped out of the interrogation room and saw Jamal waiting for him, his son's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and admiration, Jonathan knew he had made the right choice. This decision would change everything, not just for Jamal, but for their entire community. The next morning, news of the previous night's events swept through the quiet town like a wildfire. What began as whispers soon escalated into intense discussions at breakfast tables and in queues at the local coffee shop. The town, which had long cherished its close-knit community and peaceful lifestyle, now had to confront uncomfortable truths that many had conveniently ignored. Jamal woke up to the inviting smell of his father's famous pancakes wafting up the stairs. As he entered the kitchen, he overheard his parents talking in hushed, serious voices. Their conversation halted when he came in, and they both greeted him with worried smiles. "Morning, son," Jonathan said, sliding a plate of steaming pancakes across the counter. "How are you feeling?" Jamal shrugged, attempting to seem calm despite the inner turmoil. "I'm okay, I guess. Just trying to make sense of it all." His mother, Evelyn, gave him a tight hug. "We're here for you no matter what." During breakfast, the gravity of their new situation set in. Jonathan's phone kept buzzing with messages and missed calls. The local news station had already requested a statement, and through the window, Jamal saw a small group of reporters gathered at the end of their driveway, cameras at the ready. "What's next?" Jamal asked, pushing his half-eaten pancakes around the plate. Jonathan sighed, rubbing his face. "We'll face this head-on. There'll be an investigation into what happened last night. It won't be easy, but it's necessary for change. Jamal nodded firmly. I want to help, Dad. I want to tell my story. Evelyn squeezed his hand. Are you sure, honey? It might be hard with everyone knowing. I'm sure, Jamal replied steadily. If it can stop this from happening to others, it's worth it. Jonathan felt proud of his son's courage. All right, we'll do it together. As the day progressed, the Thompson family found themselves in the middle of a media storm. Jonathan's phone was constantly ringing with calls from reporters, community leaders, and fellow law enforcement officers. Some offered support, while others demanded explanations or even his resignation. By afternoon, they decided to address the situation publicly and agreed to a press conference at the sheriff's office. This decision sent the town into a state of high anticipation. At the sheriff's office, Jamal was nervous. The crowd was larger than he'd anticipated, a mass of faces, some known, some not, all looking at them expectantly. Cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions as they made their way to the podium. Jonathan stepped up first, his uniform neat and his expression determined. Good afternoon, he started, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. I'm here not just as your police chief, but as a father, a community member, and a black man who has faced prejudice. Last night, my son Jamal was wrongfully arrested. He then detailed the events, and as he spoke, shock and dismay spread across the crowd. Some nodded in understanding, while others seemed uncomfortable. What happened to Jamal isn't a one-off. It shows a bigger problem we can't ignore. As chief, I've failed if anyone in the community feels unsafe because of their skin color. Officers Miller and Reed are suspended, and we'll start bias training for all officers, review our policies, and work with the community to rebuild trust. After Jonathan, Jamal took the microphone. I'm Jamal Thompson. Last night, I was wrongly arrested on my way home from basketball practice. I was scared and humiliated just because of my skin color. His words hung in the air. But I'm not here to blame. I believe in our community. I want a town where everyone feels safe, and the police truly protect and serve all. When Jamal finished, the crowd was silent at first, then applause erupted. The press conference was a turning point. In the following days and weeks, long, avoided conversations took place. Community meetings were held, and the investigation into Miller and Reed's actions was thorough. Eventually, they were fired. For Jamal, life found a new normal. He focused more on school and basketball, and also started sharing his story at local schools to inspire change. A few months after that fateful night, Jamal's life had found a new rhythm. He was back on track with his basketball training, his performance on the court even more remarkable. College scouts were keeping a closer eye on him, and his dream of a scholarship seemed more within reach than ever. But there was a new element to his life, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the basketball court. One evening, Jamal and Jonathan sat on their front porch, enjoying the peaceful sunset. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming jasmine. You know, Dad, Jamal said, breaking the comfortable silence, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. At first, I was so angry, but now I'm grateful in a way. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Grateful? Jamal smiled. Yeah, grateful that we had the chance to make a difference. That we could turn something painful into something positive for our community. Jonathan felt a swell of pride for his son. You're right, Jamal. Change is never easy, but it's possible when good people stand up. Just then, Officer Jenkins, a veteran cop from the sheriff's office, approached. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hat. Chief Thompson, he called out hesitantly. I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to talk to you and Jamal. Jonathan and Jamal exchanged a quick look and then welcomed him. Jenkins took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize. I was at the station that night. I should have done something to stop what was happening to Jamal, but I didn't. I've realized I've been part of the problem for a long time. Jamal felt a mix of emotions, surprise, a bit of the old anger, but also respect for Jenkins' honesty. Jenkins continued, I've been on the force for 20 years. I thought I was one of the good ones, but I've turned a blind eye to a lot. What happened to Jamal made me see that not doing wrong isn't enough. We have to actively do what's right. Jonathan nodded in understanding. Thank you for saying that, Jenkins. It takes courage to admit mistakes. Jenkins then proposed a mentorship program. Some of us officers want to start a mentorship program for kids in the community. We hope to build trust. Jamal, we think your perspective could really help. Would you be willing to help us get it off the ground? Jamal's eyes widened in surprise. Me? But I'm just a high school student. Jenkins smiled. You're much more than that. You're a voice for change. Your experience can bridge the gap between the police and the youth." Jamal looked at his father for guidance. Jonathan smiled and nodded. Jamal turned back to Jenkins. "I'd be honored to help." As Jenkins left, Jamal and Jonathan were filled with a renewed sense of hope. The mentorship program quickly grew. Jamal organized basketball games where kids and cops played together, breaking down barriers. Word of the program spread, and other towns expressed interest. Jamal started traveling to share his story, inspiring change in other communities. As his senior year neared its end, Jamal faced an important decision. He had received offers from several universities, but a letter from Howard University's law school caught his attention. It was a full scholarship offer, with a focus on civil rights and social justice. Jamal discussed it with his parents. "I think this is it," he said, excited yet nervous. "Howard feels right." Jonathan and Evelyn were proud and supportive. Meanwhile, Jonathan's leadership in the sheriff's office had not been without challenges, but his efforts caught the attention of state officials, and he was offered a position as state police commissioner. This was an opportunity to implement community-oriented policing on a larger scale. Jonathan decided to accept, though it was a bittersweet moment as he loved the community he had served. On Jamal's last night in town, the community held a send-off. The high school gym was packed. Jamal stood at the podium, looking at the crowd. "A year ago I was angry and hurt. Today I'm full of hope. What happened to me was painful, but it showed me the power we have to make a difference. Let's all be the change we want to see." The crowd applauded, and Jamal knew he was ready for the next chapter of his life. The next morning, the sun shone brightly as the Thompson family prepared for their new beginnings. The moving truck rumbled in the driveway, a symbol of the changes that lay ahead. Neighbors stopped by to bid farewell, many with tears in their eyes, expressing how much the family's presence had meant to the community. Jamal loaded the last of his boxes into the car and took a moment to look back at the house where he had grown up. So much had changed in the past year, yet in many ways, it felt like the start of an even greater adventure. "You ready, son?" Jonathan called from the driver's seat. Jamal took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready." As they drove through town for the last time, Jamal noticed signs and stickers everywhere, bearing the message, "Be the change." It was a phrase he had used in his speech at the send-off celebration, and seeing it displayed so prominently filled him with a sense of purpose. "Look, Dad," Jamal said, pointing at the signs. Jonathan smiled and nodded. "Looks like you've left a mark on this town, son." On their journey, they stopped at a small diner for lunch. A TV in the diner was tuned to a news channel, and they heard their story being discussed. The anchor reported on Jamal's full scholarship to Howard University and Jonathan's appointment as state police commissioner. Jamal and Jonathan exchanged a look, uncomfortable with the attention but aware of its significance. As they ate, they overheard conversations around them. People were debating police reform, sharing their own experiences with law enforcement. It was a clear reminder of the impact their story had had. After leaving the diner, an elderly woman approached them. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "Are you the Thompsons from the news?" Jamal and Jonathan nodded. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to thank you. My grandson had a similar experience to yours, Jamal, but he didn't have anyone to stand up for him. What you're doing gives me hope." Jamal was touched and gave her a hug. "Thank you. We'll keep fighting for change." Back on the road, Jamal and Jonathan discussed their hopes and dreams for the future. Jamal talked about his plans to specialize in civil rights law at Howard University. He wanted to be a voice for those who were wrongly accused, like he had been. Jonathan shared his ideas for implementing comprehensive bias training across the state police force and increasing diversity in recruitment and promotion. They also talked about the challenges they would face. Systemic change would be slow, and there would likely be resistance from those who were reluctant to embrace new ideas. But for every challenge, they saw an opportunity. The chance to educate the public, build stronger relationships between law enforcement and communities, and create a more just society. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in beautiful colors, Jamal felt a deep sense of determination. "You know, Dad," he said, "I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our story." Jonathan glanced at his son and smiled. "I think you're right, son. This is just the start." They knew that their journey would inspire others, not just in their small town, but across the country. Their story was a powerful reminder that even in the face of injustice, there was always hope for positive change. As they drove into the fading light, each excited for their new adventures, they carried with them the hope of making the world a better place, one step at a time. And as the miles passed, their bond as father and son grew even stronger, united in their mission to bring about a more just and equitable society.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.